A look, a word, a first impression, and straight away we know, I can trust her, but not him. She is lying, and so is he, but he seems reliable. Hello. Alone, the level of trustworthiness that you perceive in another person as face, even when they rate complete strangers, can predict criminal sentencing decisions, including up to capital punishment, or can predict hiring decisions. A brief glance at someone's face or the sound of their voice can affect our decisions. Gathering information from facial and vocal has been fundamental to social interactions. Language has only been around for tens of thousands of years, which, in evolutionary terms, is no more than a blink of the eye. First impressions can be alluring, but often deceptive. I am looking forward to tomorrow. Our face and voice reveal a lot about us, our mood, our disposition, our health. They point to what is going on inside us, and the cues they give can even be interpreted by artificial intelligence. Science fiction has been predicting this development for ages, but it is still hard to fathom, and it leaves us feeling skeptical and uneasy because we are not used to it. We encounter strangers every day. A new face, an unfamiliar voice, both unique and distinct, they express our individuality. But they also help us decide whether we like the person and whether we accept or reject their advances, decisions we make instantly. In just 100 milliseconds of exposure, people already make up their mind about trustworthiness and competence and dominance. But that making up their mind takes several hundreds of milliseconds. But you only need a very quick glance on their certain facial features. Even in a static photograph that convey levels of intelligence and that can lead to judgment and biased decisions. John Freeman is looking at what happens in our brain after a short glance at someone's face. His theory, many of these instantaneous decisions are based on learned stereotypes. The same applies to voices. Pascal Bellin continues to find evidence that we associate certain emotions and traits with how someone's voice sounds. We see voices as a type of auditory face. We need just one word to form an opinion. A voice like this is seen as inspiring and confident by most people, whereas this one leaves the listener thinking they wouldn't trust him with their money. What does science say? Do we all see the same thing when we look at someone's face? John Freeman uses a special morphing program to get a more accurate answer. He can alter gender, age, mood, and character traits subtly. If you ask hundreds of different subjects to judge the trustworthiness of these individual faces, you'll find that they generally agree in terms of being highly correlated with one another, so the same faces appear trustworthy or relatively untrustworthy across the board generally. Although we rate all different, the result is surprisingly similar for everyone, at least if we were asked if someone is trustworthy. The first impression is when we decide who we want to communicate, cooperate, or form a close relationship with. Is it surprising that people have these kinds of unconscious tendencies despite humans being such rational creatures? I would say not really when we think evolutionarily about it. In terms of our evolutionary past, before we had verbal language as non-human primates, non-verbal communication, and using facial appearance. Using cues of the face, voice, and body were really critical for survival, for the maintenance of resources, for building social groups. It can be attributed to our evolution. Making instant decisions about who is friend or foe greatly increased our chances of survival. As pack animals, we've always formed communities long before language played a role. Humans developed a keen sense of how those around them felt. And being able to read the room is a huge advantage. Before, if someone in the group is scared, your own life may also be in danger too. If someone is seething with rage, you placate them or run. Our brains are still wired the same way today. As soon as we encounter someone new, we immediately attempt to establish whether they are with us or against us. But to what extent do these first impressions actually alter our behavior? The evidence shows that they have a strong impact, and they predict all sorts of downstream social outcomes and real-world consequences. There are findings like faces that appear more competent are more likely to be elected to senator and governor positions in the United States, and even presidential candidates are more likely to win in the United States. Competent-looking managers and attractive people are paid more, and defendants who look untrustworthy are given longer sentences. But what about our voices? We can hear fine nuances of confidence, dominance, and competence too, even if they have little in common with the speaker's actual personality. Beyond words, a voice also transports emotions and can even bring things to life. Puppets become real figures we relate to like other human beings. It illustrates how we instinctively relate to a human personality if it has a voice on a puppet, for example. and because of changing body cues and changing vocal cues. That the perception of the emotion, the perception of the person or the puppet's intentions are changed. Oh yes, look me in the eyes, just a little bit generosity, sympathetic, ambivalent. Our brains create real people from the voices they hear even when the people aren't real. Once you give a machine a voice, it gets a personality as if it were human. It's an automatic reflex. And research shows that people's feelings change if their computer, car, or coffee machine has a voice. The vocal acoustics we give machines could even determine how we interact with them. Wake up, wake up. How can I help you? What can you do? You can, for example, ask me to introduce myself or chat a little. Can you introduce yourself? I am a fur hat robot, a social robot built to interact with people in the same way you interact with each other, so I can smile and nod. Gabriel Skate is one of Furkate's creators. A first prototype of the robot was launched in 2011. I looked a bit more crude with cables sticking out of my head. They came up with the idea of covering the cables with a fur hat, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the name fur hat comes from. I don't really need my fur hat anymore. I look pretty as I am, don't you think? I don't know what the original interest comes from, really. I just think it's a very fascinating idea of creating an agent that interacts like a human and behaves like a human. It's fascinating by its own right. But it's also again back to the idea that if we can do that, we start to get a better understanding of how we, as humans, work in the future. Gabriel Skate wants Farhat to behave like a human during a conversation. But as soon as scientists try to transfer our human behaviors to machines, it quickly becomes apparent how complex our behaviors are. Today, Farhat is supposed to make small talk. The robot searches the web on its own for responses. What do you mean by that? You are quite stupid. That's a rude thing to say, Farhat. So I have no idea what the robot will say next. So it's a surprise for me what it says. And it's a bit fascinating to see how their conversation unfolds. Although the conversation takes some unexpected turns, Farhat has already mastered the basics. When to speak, where their conversation partner is looking, and how much eye contact is appropriate. The scientists have programmed Farhat with a whole range of emotional facial cues. However, the finer differences we express using mimic and our voices are proving trickier. So as humans, for example, we have these micro expressions. So my eyes move a little bit all the time. I make small movements with my face. And we want the robot to have those small movements also. Otherwise, it looks very robotic and not very human-like. So we think that the face is extremely important. And the way we give feedback to each other and everything is expressed through the face, but also through the voice and the tone of our voice and so on. That's why it's so difficult for Farhat to react appropriately. The same word or the same sentence can come across very differently, depending on the mood, the occasion, or the person we're talking to. Unfortunately, there's no user manual for humans that Farhat can learn from, not yet anyway. There's plenty of cases where a face can be identical and the same features, but the context, the body, and the voice dramatically changes how we understand that person. There's all sorts of different kinds of cues in terms of intonation, pitch, contour, format characteristics that change how we perceive other people's voices, the emotions that they're feeling, their intentions. How do we read moods? Mark Sweets is researching how tiny movements in our facial muscles can influence our communication. The eyebrows, cheeks, lips, and chin all contribute to forming very different types of smiles. It's very subtle because it has to do with micro expressions that you see around the eye region, already mouth region, or you can fake a smile. Like, if I do this in a very fake manner, you can see that the person is pretending to be happy or being cynical or sarcastic, but is not revealing what his or her true sentiments or emotions are. And it's not only smiling, it's also in the very subtle movements of eyebrows, the very subtle movements of blinking. A recent US TV series focused on body language. Dr. Lightman was the protagonist of the crime show Lie to My. He was an expert in micro expressions, who believed facial expressions could expose lies and suppressed emotions. Can we really identify every single emotion just by practicing? Some scientists think so. Apparently, all we need to do is to consciously notice each millisecond-long facial expression. The results are used in market research to find out which commercials are most effective. Specially trained security teams at airports also analyze facial cues to spot potential terrorists. But is it really that easy to tell when criminals are lying? Hollywood wants us to think so. 43 muscles are responsible for some 10,000 facial expressions. And if you learn them all, you'll never need a lie detector. But the scientific world takes a slightly dimmer view. In real life, it's often much harder to do. For instance, there are these claims that from micro expressions you can see whether someone is lying or not, but that's close to impossible. So for most time that people lie about something, you're close to chance level about guessing whether or not someone is speaking the truth or not. Ironically speaking, if your lie becomes more important, like if I'm lying about something which really matters, like you have to hide something, it's called the pink elephant effect. Your cues to lie become clear for the other person. So the more you try your best not to show that you're lying, the more likely it is that people will see that you're lying. How easy is it to tell when someone is lying? Mark Sweets is looking to children age 5 and over for the answer. The children are asked to tell the prince in a computer game the truth, but lie to the dragon. They're supposed to help the prince hide from the dragon. Cameras and microphones record the children's behavior in an attempt to find any differences after recording numerous children. The results highlight signs that point to lying. When you look at the face when they're being truthful, they have a very open and spontaneous kind of expression. When they're lying and they have the impression that they're being watched and being observed, you see that they have this sense of, yo, I'm being observed. And you can tell from facial expressions around the mouth area, which is more marked than in the truthful condition, and it's something about the voice. So when they're being truthful, they have a very soft, normal, warm voice. When they are lying, they tend to be a little bit more using a creaky voice, like taking a little bit like this. But not every child showed the same cues, so it's not a reliable way to tell if they are telling the truth or not. Generally, we are much better at controlling our facial cues than our vocal cues. Every sound we produce is created by over 100 muscles all working closely together. Emotions alter muscular tension, which impacts the tone of our voices. Everything is controlled by different parts of the brain. The muscles in the chest and abdomen that create the required air pressure. Muscles in the tongue, lips, and face that vary the voice, and, of course, the larynx and vocal cords. The higher the pitch when we become excited, for example, the faster they vibrate. But does everyone hear the same thing when a stranger talks to us? Do we all come to the same conclusion in deciding if someone is trustworthy, extroverted, or willing to try new things? Bjorn Schuler is conducting research using a range of different voices. Although the group doesn't agree on everything, the data shows some clear tendencies. Artificial intelligence is being used to help identify them. My theory is that if a human can hear something, a computer can pick up on it too. But it becomes a little spooky when we go beyond what a human can spot. We're now trying to assess whether the speaker has COVID-19 or not. Plus for yes and minus for no. We've got one vote for positive. It was negative. Here's the next voice. We now have 3 positives and 1 negative. I'm going to say positive. Maurice, yes, that's right. Diagnosing COVID by simply listening to someone's voice sounds risky, at least when we rely on the human ear. At the start of the pandemic, Bjorn Schuler programmed a range of voices into artificial intelligence. Is a more accurate diagnosis now possible? This is the asymptomatic negative case, and this is the symptomatic positive case. What we can see quite clearly on the right here are the upper tones. There are lots more signals we can use too, like the uncontrolled vibration of the vocal cords that leads to irregularities in the stimuli, a certain throatiness, breathlessness that causes longer speech breaks. All these things give the computer enough examples to reach a decision and differentiate between asthma or a cold. At least 85% of the diagnoses made by artificial intelligence were correct. What's more, computers can also identify ADHD, Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's, and depression by analyzing voices. Anything that goes wrong in the body or brain impacts our voices. To make a diagnosis, artificial intelligence looks at up to 6,000 different vocal cues. The new technology could allow diagnoses to be made more easily and earlier. Every word we say reveals more about us than we realize. And as listeners, we are influenced by the person speaking to us. Subconsciously, we relate to the person speaking. We internalize their anxiety, uncertainty, excitement, or happiness as if it were our own. It's a type of synchronization that connects two people through mimicry. But in general, mimicry is something that we do observe a lot in normal kind of conversations.